Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is September 16th, 2021. This is our 70th episode. My name is Andy Z. I'm the host of the show, coming to you from Los Angeles, California.
And my name is Sunsara Taylor. I'm the co-host of the show. And we are, as the name of our show puts it, we are about revolution, nothing less. Because nothing less than an actual revolution, the overthrow of the system that rules over us, capitalism-imperialism, can bring about a future worth living for humanity. And we bring this alive every week on this show. We bring out why you need an actual revolution, and we bring alive the strategy to make a revolution. We get into what kind of society this revolution could bring about and how this is a society aimed at the emancipation of all humanity. We're rooted, and all of this is drawing from the new communism that's been forged by the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian. We are followers of Bob Avakian. And that means we are fighters for revolution. And we are inviting you every week, and we're calling on you to take up the challenge and take up the invitation to join this revolution and to be about emancipating humanity. So Andy, you want to talk a little bit about what's in our show today?
Yeah, I think just to introduce, we have two big segments and a couple of small segments and a few surprises. But the theme of one of the two key themes of today's show is that really there's just two choices facing humanity. I'm just going to bring you a little bit of, from the beginning of the film, the talk by Bob Avakian, why we need a real revolution, an actual revolution, and how we could really make revolution. After he's talked about 5 key fault lines, which means 5 key problems of this that this system can't solve, why we need an actual revolution.
Why, along with all this, do we live in a world where large parts of humanity live in stark poverty, with 2.3 billion people lacking even rudimentary toilets or latrines, and huge numbers suffering from preventable diseases, with millions of children dying every year from these diseases and from starvation, while 150 million children in the world are forced to engage in ruthlessly exploited child labor. And the whole world economy rests on a vast network of sweatshops, employing large numbers of women who are regularly subjected to sexual harassment and assault. A world where 65 million refugees have been displaced by war, poverty, persecution, and the effects of global warming. Why is this the state of humanity? There is one fundamental reason. The basic nature of the system of capitalism-imperialism that we live under, and the way, because of its very nature, it continually perpetrates and perpetuates horror after horror. And in fundamental terms, we have two choices. Either live with all this and condemn future generations to the same, or worse, if they have a future at all, or make revolution.
So the two choices come out very clearly in our first segment of the show today, which is on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations. The United Nations is about to go in session in New York this week, and there's going to be a big conference on the climate in Glasgow, Scotland, in November. And this segment on the environment is really going to bring out why there's only two choices. Either we make revolution, or it's going to be a horror show for humanity, if not the extinction of humanity. So that's going to be our first segment.
Yeah, we're also going to take a little bit of time. We've been covering the absolutely outrageous, the woman-hating, the fanatical, fascist abortion ban out of Texas, which was given the green light by the Supreme Court, and is also, people need to understand, is a form of a vigilante bounty hunter enforcement that goes along with this law. So we're going to touch on that. But then we're going to move into really, you'll get to see Bob Avakian again, where he speaks very movingly and in a way that's extremely timely, probably even more timely than when he did this as part of that speech, why we need an actual revolution and how we could really make revolution in the question and answer. he talks about the need for people to step into this revolution. And what we have in the science, the leadership, the strategy to make a revolution, but also the great need that you are part of solving. So that's going to be in the middle of our show. And
actually, that's the second theme of today's show. Not only do we need you in the revolution, but there's a place for you. There's a role for you to play. And we're going to be doing some different things in today's show. Most of today's show, almost everything other than this conversation and our introductions to these various segments, is going to be either produced by, written by, narrated by new people. People who've been, some of the people who've worked on this show have and done various things, have taken responsibility for whole segments. New people have formed a team on this environment segment, was produced by a group of people who work together on this, and it's a new thing. And there'll be some little treats too that you can see what some of the newer RevComs are actually doing. And this is very important because it's a way of inviting you into the revolution, and you can see what a difference it makes as more and more people start taking this up and spreading this revolution and this leadership we have in Bob Avakian. So that's just to speak about why we included that segment in it. And then there's still one more segment, one more major segment.
And so for our final segment, we're looking at the 50-year anniversary of the Attica Prison Uprising, a heroic struggle, one with many lessons for today, and we'll be getting into that at the tail end of the show.
All right, so I want to just get right into this first segment. As I said, it's been produced by a group of people and graduate students, people just out of college working, and they worked together on this for a few weeks, talking about it and coming up with this script. It's called The New UN Report on Climate Change, a more accurate and alarming picture of the peril facing our planet.
The new UN report on climate change, a more accurate and alarming picture of the peril facing our planet. On August 9th, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations, or IPCC, released its eagerly awaited report on the global climate crisis. This report is the product of the cooperative work of hundreds of scientists around the world. The basic science of climate change and global warming has been well established for decades. This is the scientific understanding that human activity, namely the burning of fossil fuels like oil and natural gas, along with the clearing and thinning of forests, is causing the planet to warm. And this is having dire consequences. The new IPCC report represents a tremendous and important advance in this scientific understanding. It paints a clearer, more vivid picture of the devastating impact that climate change is already having. And it identifies some of the massive and even more devastating impacts of climate change that are now locked into the future for thousands of years to come. Let's talk about some of the report's key findings. Because of advances in the science of climate change, this report is able to draw a more direct link between the warming of the planet caused by the burning of fossil fuels and the widespread extreme weather events much of the planet is currently experiencing. These extreme events include this summer's deadly heat waves. July 2021 was the hottest month ever recorded. From the Pacific Northwest here in the US to Italy and Greece in southern Europe, people have experienced temperatures well above what is considered safe for humans and well beyond previously normal summer temperatures. The new IPCC report concludes that heat waves, which used to occur once every 50 years, will now occur once every 10 years, and that many of the heat waves currently experienced would have been extremely unlikely to occur without human-caused global warming. Because of climate change, tropical storms are becoming larger, stronger, wetter, and more dangerous. They are producing more rain, therefore increasing the risk of flooding. And combined with rising sea levels, which we will talk about more shortly, this flooding will gravely threaten the hundreds of millions of people worldwide who live in low-lying coastal areas. Hurricane Ida recently left a massive trail of damage in Louisiana and Mississippi, traveling up the eastern coast of the United States. This is an example of a tropical storm that is supercharged by climate change. A storm like Ida lasts longer because storms are slower moving due to climate change, and they dump more water and are more intense. The new IPCC report has determined that Category 3 to Category 5 storms, the most intense storms, have increased in frequency over the last 40 years due to climate change. With more global warming, such storms will become more frequent. The IPCC report also concludes that wildfires, like those in California, Oregon, and Colorado in the US, and in Turkey, Spain, and Greece, are happening more frequently because of climate change. Wildfires like the recent Caldor fire at Lake Tahoe and the Dixie Fire, the single largest fire in California's history, are happening more often because of a dangerous combination of factors. This is what the report calls the compound effects of higher temperatures, heat waves, and droughts driven by human-caused climate change. The new IPCC report also highlights long-term environmental changes that are now locked in to the future and will unfold over thousands and thousands of years, transforming the planet as we know it. Some of these already irreversible changes include rises in ocean temperature, higher acid content of ocean water, which harms many sea organisms, and reduction of oxygen in the oceans. These changes will lead to the dying off of many sea-dwelling species. These changes will also upset the fragile balance of the Earth's ecosystem, like coral reefs, and deplete crucial food sources for much of the planet. The IPCC report reinforces the understanding that warmer atmospheric temperatures and already rising ocean temperatures will lead to further sea level rise, as glaciers and massive ice sheets in the Arctic and Antarctic melt. The flooding that rising sea levels will cause has the potential to make whole sections of the planet unlivable for populations of different island countries and for low-lying countries like Bangladesh. The report builds on advances in scientific methods and findings in the last decade, which have enabled scientists to draw firmer and more definite conclusions about crucial questions, like how much the climate will warm if business as usual continues for decades. For example, scientists better understand more of the history of the Earth's climate changing and how this relates to carbon dioxide concentration. Another example is advances in ocean science. The oceans absorb massive amounts of heat from the atmosphere, and scientists have learned more about how much the oceans can soak up and how warming oceans interact with the temperature. All of this, along with advances in the actual computer models, underlie further certitude in sounding the alarm on the grave danger we face from climate change. This deepened understanding feeds into the most important takeaway message of this new IPCC report. When it comes to dealing with the climate crisis, we are running out of time and moving in the wrong direction. Governments are not acting in ways that correspond to the urgency of this crisis. Now let's talk about what the report doesn't say. In order to stop warming the planet, we need an entire restructuring of the global economy from top to bottom. This means a rapid shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources, a transformation of the world agriculture system, and a fundamental change in how goods are produced, distributed, and consumed. The cold truth is that to seriously deal with climate change, you have to put the oil companies out of business, seize their assets, and leave most of the oil in the ground. To address this crisis requires global cooperation and collaboration. You need society-wide economic planning that puts social need and environmental imperatives in command. But none of this can happen under this system. This kind of full-scale transformation of society and economy is utterly at odds with how the world capitalist imperialist system functions. This is a system organized around production for profit, a system in which the great imperial powers compete and contend with each other for global control and influence, a system that is leading to ever-widening social inequalities between the rich capitalist imperialist countries and the poor countries of the global south that are suffering the greatest consequences of global warming. However, there is hope on a scientific basis. Those who care about the planet must confront the reality that to deal with climate change, we need system change. And system change requires a real revolution to overthrow capitalism and replace it with a socialist system on the road to communism. This revolution is possible, and not in some far-off distant future. This is one of those rare times when a real revolution is actually possible in this country. And this is something that must be seized on and built for now. Only a genuinely socialist system can meet the needs of humanity and unleash the creativity, knowledge, and determination of people who agonize over this crisis to go to work on it and create a society and world that could interact with nature in a sustainable way. As it says in some key principles of socialist sustainable development, the new socialist society will put the interests of the preservation of the ecosystems of the entire planet above its own national development. It will encourage and give scientific, technical, and organizational backing for bold international initiatives to prevent widespread ecosystem collapse of coral reefs, rainforests, critical savanna regions, etc. A revolution in the former United States will put an end to the pollution-intensive, cheap labor, global manufacturing grids of production. The structure of production and the resource base of a new socialist economy will no longer rely on labor and materials from other countries, like cheap parts from hellish factories in Mexico and inflows of oil from abroad. The new society will provide technical and financial assistance for helping to clean up environmental damage in other parts of the world caused by the energy and mining operations, agribusiness and forestry, and industrial activities, as well as the export and dumping of toxic waste of the former U.S. empire. The new socialist state will immediately dismantle all military bases and occupations. It will vastly downsize the military industry and begin to convert huge components for productive social use. Think about what it would mean if a revolution were to take place right here in the belly of the beast, in the country most responsible for the climate crisis. While nothing is guaranteed in regard to this crisis, a revolution would enable humanity to begin working on this problem right away and would open up the possibility of the large-scale transformations required to curb carbon emissions from fossil fuels and shift to renewable energy on the scale that's required. And the new revolutionary society would serve as a base area to spread revolution to other parts of the world. It would be a source of hope and daring to people all over the world, and an inspiration for ecologically sustainable socialist development the world over. For more information, check out The Constitution for a New Socialist Republic in North America, authored by Bob Avakian, the special resource page on the environmental emergency, and the special issue of Revolution newspaper on the environment at revcom.us.
Okay, I want to thank the team that put together this really substantive report, a more accurate and alarming picture of the peril facing our planet. This is something we at the RNL show want to make sure that people in the environmental movement and everybody really use and spread among people. And I just have three things I want to say about it. It's very important that young people and everybody get out and raise a hue and cry around the destruction of our planet. This is very important. And this revolution invites everybody who's concerned about this planet to find out about this revolution, to discuss why a revolution is actually necessary to solve this and other problems, what that revolution's all about and what it's for. And second, I think this segment you just watched made the point that you can't reform the environment into something that's going to be sustainable. You need an actual change in social systems. Last week, President Biden was in Colorado speaking about the environment. He said something that is caused by humans can be solved by humans. Well, not by this system, but humans, all of you, all these young people, we need to be out in the streets. We need to be learning about this revolution and this leadership and really fundamentally changing the world to save humanity and to save this planet. And my third point is this. The segment talked about that you need a different system all over the whole world because the world the environment doesn't know about borders between countries. But I want to say this, if we made a revolution in this country, the most powerful imperialist country in the world, whose military is one of the largest polluters in the world, if not the largest, this would be a game changer for humanity. So with that, we want to move to our next segment.
Yeah, I just have to tag on and express my appreciation to the writing team that put that together as well. With that, we do want to go, actually, before we move to our next segment, we want to share with you a couple of things that we found on social media that we found pretty exciting and we wanted to give you a flavor of. So let's do that, and then we'll go to our next segment.
Joe Biden just sold out the future of our movement by eliminating all climate assistance from his budget. And he did it after a year of some of the worst climate disasters in modern history. Does anyone remember the Lake Charles floods, the Texas freeze? He did this because he's more scared of Republicans than he is of us, the people.
Okay, hold on. Yes, Joe Biden is afraid of the Republicans. But the reason that he will not deal with the climate emergency is because he presides over a system that requires the destruction of the environment. You may have heard of this system. It's called capitalism-imperialism. And no, this system cannot be reformed. It must be overthrown through an actual revolution. And we are living in a rare time where an actual revolution can be made. The RevComs are organizing now for this revolution, and we need you to join with that. If you're tired of hearing about and chasing empty solutions, and you understand the urgent moment that we face, then now is the time to join and get organized. A challenge to Bill Maher from revolutionary leader Bob Avakian. But first, if you haven't seen this really obscene segment from Bill's show, here's a taste.
Watching the shit go down in Afghanistan, I was reminded lately of every conversation I've ever had with an immigrant, almost all of which, if we got to really talking, included the notion, oh, you people have no idea. All you do is bitch about and badmouth your own country, but if you knew about the country I came from, you'd stop shitting on your own.
Hey, Bill. Here's a politically incorrect truth that can't be canceled, America is not and never has been great except in one way. It is the world's greatest oppressor and destroyer of the environment. Do you dare to take up the challenge of trying to refute this? You can read the full challenge at revcom.us. So, Bill, do you have the integrity and the courage to do this? If so, make it happen. If not, shut up with your bullshit about how great this country and this system is.
Okay, so those were two TikToks prepared by this social media team of the RevComs, and we need a lot more stuff like that. So there's a lot of ways to have fun with this and to really spread this revolution. So write us at the revcoms@gmail.com if you want to be part of our social media team.
Or DM us at the RevComs. So with that, we want to move forward and look at this segment from the question and answer of the major talk BA gave in 2018, why we need an actual revolution and how we can really make revolution. This was during the Q&A, and he's talking about the need for you to step into this revolution. So let's watch.
The reason that I wanted to do what we're doing here today is because we need a lot of new people to come into this revolution, become part of this revolution, help to solve the problems of the revolution. I know you might be saying, well, what, how am I going to solve the problems of the revolution? I just heard about this 6 weeks ago. Well, everybody starts somewhere, and everybody has things to contribute. And we really need people to become part of this revolution. And, like I said, people should start with what they, can readily do and feel confident doing, that can contribute and learn more and contribute more and keep advancing. And come in at the point which you're convinced about all of this, including the atheism, come into the party and help to strengthen the party to be the revolutionary vanguard it needs to be. And meanwhile, go out there and work among broader numbers of people, even while you're learning and struggling and determining whether you do agree with all of it. Help bring forward more people to be part of this process so that we can actually very quickly, and I don't mean in a week or a month, but we don't have indefinite time. Look what's going on in the world. So that we can move to where there are thousands of people organized into this revolution. And believe me, if there are thousands of people organized into this revolution, all acting in a unified way, I don't mean like, I think the same thing as you, I don't have any ideas of my own. No. But I mean having a scientific approach, and struggling together to recognize and solve the problems of the revolution. If you have thousands of people who are doing that, you're going to influence and impact the whole society in a very big way. So this is what we need. Look, I've said this before, it has to be understood in the right way, but the millions and billions of suffering people in the world are counting on us even though they don't know it. And a lot of them will tell us that we're wrong and you don't know what you're talking about. I was going to swear, but I've done enough swearing for today. But you don't know what you're talking about. That's not going to get anywhere. Nobody's down with that. Even all those people who tell us that even though they don't know it, they're counting on us in a real sense, because what is represented by what we're talking about and grappling with here is the only way forward out of this madness for these masses, millions and literally billions of people, whether they know it yet or not. So this is a responsibility that we're all called on to take up and contribute in whatever ways we can while we're learning more and struggling with each other and struggling to understand things more deeply and saying what we think is wrong if we think something is wrong and fighting it out. I don't mean this way, but I mean, struggling it out to figure out what's right and how to go forward. This is what we all are called on to do. And to go out and get, what we're called on to do most of all is to go out and bring forward a lot more people to become part of this with us.
One of the ways to answer the call to get into this revolution now is to join with the work the RevComs are doing to stand up against this fascist assault on women's right to abortion. The most extreme abortion ban is now in effect in Texas. Women cannot get abortions in that state after 6 weeks. And next month, the Supreme Court is going to hear a case that could completely upend abortion rights nationwide. This is really a tipping point moment for the lives and future of women. And so it's very important society-wide people stand up against this. And the RevComs are organizing to strengthen that struggle right now. I want to share with you the call to join the contingents from the RevComs at marches that are being planned on October 2nd around the country. This is Luna and Maya from the Revolution Clubs.
On October the 2nd, we invite you and call on you to march with us in the Break the Chains contingent.
On October 2nd, the Women's March and other groups have called for powerful demonstrations all over the country in defense of abortion rights. These rights are under relentless attack, and since September 1st have been effectively taken away in Texas. This is the future that fascist Republican Party and the courts they increasingly dominate are nailing down. A future that is not yet being resisted and opposed anywhere near firmly or defiantly enough.
Everyone who cares about the emancipation of half of humanity that is female should be at one of these marches on October the 2nd and make this a turning point in building relentless in the streets resistance.
The RevComs are forming a contingent to march on that day of all those who see the need for uncompromising resistance in the streets against these horrible laws and who hunger for a whole new world. If you are sick and tired of women being treated as less than full human beings, if you agonize about the Handmaid's Tale future that is no longer science fiction but is now real and upon us, if you recognize that there can be no compromise with Christian fascists and unjust laws that enforce female enslavement, and most of all, if you see the need to dig up the roots of this and every other form of oppression and exploitation and bring in a whole new emancipatory world, then you need to be a part of this contingent.
Bob Avakian, the revolutionary leader who we RevComs follow, has said this: you cannot break all the chains except one. You cannot say you want to be free of exploitation and oppression, except you want to keep the oppression of women by men. You can't say you want to liberate humanity, yet keep one half of the people enslaved to the other half. The oppression of women is completely bound up with the division of society into masters and slaves, exploiters and exploited. And the ending of all such conditions is impossible without the complete liberation of women. All this is why women have a tremendous role to play, not only in making revolution, but in making sure that there's all the way revolution. The fury of women can and must be fully unleashed as a mighty force for proletarian revolution. Basics 322.
Join us in Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Oakland, San Francisco, Berkeley, and elsewhere, or start your own contingent. Mass meetings to learn more, plan, and get organized will be held on the weekend of September 25th through the 26th.
Unleash the fury of women as a mighty force for revolution.
No going back, no surrender. Abortion on demand and without apology.
Forced motherhood is female enslavement.
Christian fascist theocrats, get your laws and vigilantes off our bodies.
Patriarchy and capitalism. You can't end one without ending the other. Revolution, nothing less.
I want to extend an invitation to everybody watching right now to come to mass meetings being held on the weekend of September 25th and 26th by the Revolution Clubs to invite you into really getting into why we need this revolution and why only a revolution can break the chains on women and really break the chains on humanity as a whole. Is that true? What this revolution can bring about? We need to work with these ideas. We need to get into them together. And we need to do this as we're taking up the fight against this outrageous fascist assault on the lives of women. So everybody watching, including, I just want to underscore, this is not just for the women, although definitely you are invited, but for the men too, and people of all genders, as you heard in that quote that they read from Bob Avakian. This is a central question of the revolution. So we want to invite you again the weekend of September 25th and 26th. Come get involved, get into this. We need to work on this together.
Okay, and so before our segment on Attica, the 50th anniversary, we want to give you one more TikTok from the RevComs.
Hey, what are you reading?
I just got this book, Basics, from these communists downtown.
Communists?
Yeah, they said it's the handbook for revolution. It's called Basics. It was actually written by this communist leader named Bob Avakian.
Communist leader? That's a dictator.
Dude, that sounds like a cult. Don't read that.
I can think for myself. I'm not afraid to read this. There would be no United States as we now know it today without slavery. That is a simple and basic truth.
That's true.
The role of the police is not to serve and protect the people. It is to serve and protect the system that rules over the people. Let's get down to basics. We need a revolution. Anything else in the final analysis is bullshit. Our party calls on people and says the first thing you should do is raise your head up and ask why. Ask why whenever they tell you to do anything, and for that matter, ask why whenever we say you should do anything. Because we're not afraid of people questioning us. We're not afraid of people digging into what we have to say.
Let me see that.
Now we want to go to our segment on the 50th anniversary of the Attica Prison Uprising, written, produced, and anchored by Pete from the RNL team. Let's go there now.
"50 years ago, the most powerful prison rebellion in U.S. history had erupted at Attica Prison in upstate New York. Hey, this is Pete. I'm with the RNL show, the Revolution Nothing Less show, and this week we want to commemorate and honor this heroic struggle where prisoners of Attica, mostly black men but also white and Puerto Rican, who came together to be known as the Attica Brothers, seized control of large parts of the prison, taking 38 guards as hostages. Their spirit was captured by their 21-year-old spokesman, L.D. Barkley.
We are men. We are not beasts, and we do not intend to be driven or beaten as such. The entire prison populace has set forth to change forever the ruthless brutalization and disregard for the lives of the prisoners here and throughout the United States. What has happened here is but the sound before the fury of those who are oppressed.
They issued demands, quote, that will bring closer to reality the demise of these prison institutions that serve no useful purpose to the people of America, but to those who would enslave and exploit the people of America, end quote. Their key demands include a complete amnesty for their takeover, transport to a non-imperialistic country for those who wanted it, and negotiation through a team of observers that they chose. They set forth 15 practical proposals.
We want to allow all New York State prisoners to be politically active without intimidation or reprisals. Number 4, in all censorship of newspapers, magazines, letters, and other publications coming from the publisher. 5, allow all inmates at their own expense to communicate with anyone they please.
This uprising was fueled by routine abuse, horrific living conditions, the state's refusal to address their grievances, and the racism and national oppression permeating Attica and U.S. society. Many of the men confined at Attica had been radicalized by the upheavals of the 1960s and the August 21st murder of the revolutionary prisoner and leader George Jackson by guards at California's San Quentin prison. Let's go to the clip by Bob Avakian from the talk in 2003, Revolution, Why It's Necessary, Why It's Possible, What It's All About, where he speaks about this uprising.
And what about the Attica Prison Uprising in 1971 in New York State? The conditions in Attica Prison were so horrible, as they are in prisons throughout the U.S. today, but they were so horrible that people couldn't put up with it any longer. And finally, there was a rebellion, uniting black, Puerto Rican, and white prisoners together, taking over a section of the prison, taking guards, hostages, and issuing demands for improvements in their condition, as well as making political statements in support of resistance and revolutionary struggles around the world. It was a great and heroic uprising. It showed a glimmer of the future, when people who had been held down and kicked around in these most degraded conditions could rise up in this kind of way, break through the divisions that were fomented in their ranks, and not only raise demands about their own conditions, but speak to the struggles of the people of the world. And for several days they held out. They were very careful. They distributed food among themselves. They cooperated every way. And they actually assigned people to protect the guards who were hostages so that no damage would come to them and that couldn't be used as an excuse to attack them. But finally, the Governor Rockefeller and the rest of the powers that be said that's enough. They sent the state troopers in. They brutally slaughtered and murdered dozens of prisoners, and they killed the guards who were hostages at the same time. And we know from reports that then the state troopers went to local bars, drank, and celebrated together over the massacre they'd carried out. And just like with Fred Hampton, they told lies. They tried for years to say that the prisoners, when the state troopers intervened and invaded, had slit the throats of the guards. And finally, that was exposed as a lie. But in the meantime, they brutally murdered dozens of people, including their own guards.
The Attica brothers reached out to the world and to prominent voices in the U.S., including radical lawyer William Kunstler, Black Panther Party leader Bobby Seale, leaders of the Puerto Rican Young Lords Party, and the New York Times writer Tom Wicker. From the FBI to President Nixon, the ruling powers at the highest levels were shocked and shaken by the prison takeover. New York prison officials refused to accept the prisoners' demands, especially for amnesty. Governor Nelson Rockefeller rejected calls from many quarters to visit the prison. Instead, he and New York's police forces secretly planned a full-out military assault. Here we're going to draw from a program at Revolution Books in 2017 that Andy Z hosted with Heather Ann Thompson, historian of African American studies and author of Blood in the Water, the Attica Prison Uprising of 1971 and its legacy.
Ultimately, though, of course, nobody helped them. And a series of quite unexpected events leads them to have control of the prison on September 9th, 1971. And to give you a sense of that, I don't take you just into the newspaper accounts of it. I want to take you in this book into 1 minute you are in D-Yard, 1 minute you were in Rockefeller's living room, 1 minute you were in the Nixon White House. I want you to feel this story. And in that spirit, this is from the first night in the yard. Despite the sense of foreboding, there were moments of levity, and for some, even a feeling of unexpected joy, as men who hadn't felt the fresh air of night for years reveled in this strange freedom. Out in the dark, music could be heard, drums, a guitar, vibes, flute, sax that the brothers were playing. This was the lightest many of these men had felt since being processed into this maximum security facility. That night was in fact a deeply emotional time for all of them. Richard Clark watched in amazement as men embraced each other, and he saw one man break down into tears because it had been so long since he'd been allowed to get close to someone. Carlos Roche watched as tears of elation ran down the withered face of his friend Owl, an old man who'd been locked up for decades. "You know," Owl said in wonderment, "I haven't seen the stars in 22 years." As Clark later described this first night of the rebellion, while there was much trepidation about what might occur next, the men in D-Yard also felt wonderful because, quote, "no matter what happened later on, they couldn't take this night away from us." Up on the catwalk, prisoners and hostages alike waited with hearts pounding for what might happen next, wobbling slightly because it was hard to keep one's balance. Hostage Mike Smith began having a serious discussion with one of his so-called executioners, Don Noble. Noble was one of the 2 prisoners who'd gone to great lengths to protect Mike from harm when the rebellion had broken out 5 days earlier. And Mike was greatly relieved to hear this man's voice next to him once he'd finally made it through D Tunnel and up onto the catwalk. Mike had been worried for a few days now that the state might choose to sacrifice him and his fellow hostages. And he felt the need to write a letter to his wife Sharon in case he didn't make it out of Attica alive. He'd gotten hold of a pen from one of the other hostages. He'd somehow managed to keep it hidden in his pocket. And he'd secretly written her a note that he secured deep in his wallet. With the minutes ticking by, Mike and Don both expressed deep sadness that the last 4 days had come down to this. Then, after telling each other how to reach their loved ones, they made a solemn pact that if anything happened to either of them, they would find the other's family members and make sure they knew how much they were loved. No sooner had Mike Smith and Don Noble finished exchanging their personal information when they heard a sound that sent a chill down their spines. It was the ominous roar of helicopter blades revving up. Besides being able to hear it, Mike Smith recalled in horror, you could actually feel the concussion of the propellers. And what they heard was a helicopter that will come over Attica and saturate it with CN and CS gas, which is really a misnomer because it isn't really gas, it's actually a powder that was in their nasal passages down their throats. So people are retching and falling to the ground, they are blinded, and that is when they send in the state troopers. State troopers who, by the way, had already removed their identifying badges, who were carrying weapons outlawed by the Geneva Convention, their personal weapons as well as state-issue weapons. They'd been passing out weapons for hours and days. Nobody's writing down serial numbers. In fact, one hapless trooper who's trying to write down serial numbers is told to rip it up. Mike Smith felt the impact of the prisoner on his right shot twice, the last shot literally catapulting him over the railing of the catwalk. In a futile attempt to save both himself and Mike from being hit, Don Noble pulled him to the left as the man immediately behind him received a fatal volley of gunfire. But the shots reached them anyway. Mike's abdomen was on fire as 4 bullets ripped across it in a straight line. He was also shot in the arm, which felt as if it had been torn from his body. And then I described these horrendous injuries. As he lay curled up, bleeding profusely, Mike suddenly found himself looking up into the eyes of a trooper who had a shotgun pointed directly at his head. Somewhere close by, he heard a correction officer yell to the trooper, "He's one of us," and started to breathe a sigh of relief. Then he realized sickeningly that the trooper had simply resighted his weapon on Don Noble, who also lay bleeding next to him. Weakly, Mike tried to tell the trooper, "He saved my life." To his relief, as he faded in and out of consciousness, he saw that Noble had seemed to have been spared.
As she describes, the state's armed forces stormed in, rampaging through the prison. Attica brother Akil al-Jundi recalled, quote, "They came in there with their guns and bayonets, blasting everything that moved. They shot at everybody. They went from cell to cell with machine guns, spraying the cells, under the beds. They didn't care whether there was anybody there. They were just shooting. Their objective was to kill, not to ask questions, but to kill." Political prisoners, leaders of the uprisings, and others were singled out and executed. L.D. Barkley was shot in the back. Hundreds of prisoners were forced to strip naked, crawl through mud and broken glass, and then run through a gauntlet of batons wielded by cops. Many were tortured, including Frank Big Black Smith, who was tortured for 6 hours. Big Black was forced to lie on a table with a football under his chin, and the pigs told him he would be killed if the ball ever moved or fell, while he was being burned by cigarettes and hot bullet casings and beaten on the testicles.
I have Governor Rockefeller for you, sir. There you are.
Mr. President, I know you've had a hard day, but I want you to know that I just back you to the hilt. The courage you showed and the judgment in not granting amnesty, it was right, and I don't care what the hell the papers or anybody else says. I don't care what they say. I think that you had to do it that way, because if you would have granted amnesty in this case, it would have meant that you would have had prisons in an uproar all over this country.
That's right.
And you did the right thing. It's a tragedy that these poor fellows are shot, but I just want you to know that's my view, and I pulled the troops around here there to back that right to the hilt.
Well, aren't you great, Mr. President? I only called you because I wanted to alert you that we were going in, and when we went in, we couldn't tell whether all 39 hostages would be killed and maybe 200 or 300 prisoners.
Tell me this, are these primarily blacks that you're dealing with?
The whole thing was led by the blacks.
I'll be darned. Are all the prisoners that were killed blacks? Are there any whites?
I haven't got that report, but I have to. I would say just offhand, yes.
Yeah.
We did it, though, only when they were in the process of murdering the guards or when they were attacking our people as they came in to get the guards.
You had to do it.
That's right.
Good.
It really was a beautiful operation.
Well, they must.
I came to find out about Attica in college, and I was fortunate enough to have someone named Clyde Young, a former prisoner and a revolutionary communist and follower of Bob Avakian, be invited into my sociology class and show us the footage of what had happened at Attica. I don't know what everyone else in the class thought, but when I saw the footage of the crimes of this government that the state committed by executing those unarmed men who had been in prison on top of that roof, including their own of the hostages, and launching a barrage of bullets at everyone they saw, I knew right away that this crime by the state had to be condemned. And when I learned about how the prisoners had dropped the hate that this system wanted them to have for each other and came together from different backgrounds for basic and just demands together, organizing a different way to live and a different meaning and goal to fight for. Everything I believed of what was possible in the world completely shattered. And now, I'm seeing that this came out of a time of tremendous social upheaval, of people revolting against the oppression of Black and national oppression, against U.S. imperialism in Vietnam and many other countries, and forging collective and revolutionary struggles. This had a magnified effect on everyone else in the world, in unity with and giving heart and inspiration to revolutionary and anti-colonial struggles throughout the world. It brought out those who under normal times would sit out to jump in and get involved in the struggle against oppression and injustice, to expose the lies and tell the truth, no matter the deadly consequences, to bear witness of what happened by writing books and speaking out wherever they could. The brave determination of the Attica brothers influenced people everywhere, like the historian and author Heather Ann Thompson, to dig deep and unearth the truth they don't want you to know about. But when some people still say there's no point to struggle, to fight, because this system is too powerful and they'll crush us, do we say back to them, bullshit, quit letting the system speak from out of your mouth. You just don't know what you're talking about. We have seen the potential of the masses of people who under extreme conditions come together to rise up and fight against their oppression. This is what this system is afraid of. We have seen systems uprooted, people rising up and overthrowing their oppressors and bringing a different system and a radically different way of things. And look, right now, we have the leadership and strategy to work toward a time where millions can overthrow this system. And we have a constitution for not only how that system would run, but it would go farther and be much better than what we had before, aiming toward a world free of exploitation and oppression. And people like you are needed to work on making that happen, joining this and organizing others instead of reinforcing what everyone else is saying and keeping things the way that they are. Lastly, I want to direct our viewers to the film that can be found on HBO Max right now called Betrayal at Attica, the American crime series located on revcom.us, especially this one on Attica, and the full video of the event at Revolution Books. So to the fallen heroes of Attica, we say, presente.
All right, Sunsara, so that was Pete from our crew here taking the responsibility to put together that very powerful segment on Attica. And I want to thank again the team that did the environmental program on the IPCC report. And I want to thank the RevComs social media team for the TikToks. We had a lot of new things on this show. We want to have more of that. And we want you to get involved in supporting this show and contributing to it. So with that, I'm going to say good night.
And we'll see you back next week, Thursday, same time. Until then, get out there and help make revolution.